One of my oldest running tanks is my Neolamprologus multifasciatus tank, but it is sitting underneath a 75-gallon that is now completely empty and going to be replaced here very soon. So it's time for these Shelleys, these multis, whatever you want to call them, to get a new home. It's about time. It's past time. When I set up this tank, I put pool filter sand in there and I just threw some rocks in there and called it a day. Now, to be fair, multis are notoriously difficult to aquascape for because there is no aquascaping for them because they choose what their home looks like. So I'm not really going to be doing some kind of elaborate aquascape because whatever I do with this scape, they're going to tear it up anyway. But it is a fun process to move them from one tank to another, and I'm super excited to just give them a little bit better looking home, some nicer substrate, so at least when they make their mounds, it's in a pretty substrate rather than a really ugly one. So let's get going. In the words of Henry Ford, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. So once again, I will be painting the back of this tank black for a black background. My water is very soft, so I use this Carib Sea African cichlid mix, which helps buffer the water and raise the pH and the hardness. Unfortunately, this sand was so dusty and it never quite cleared up. To make matters worse, I decided I wanted more substrate and I had another bag, so I decided to clean that one out and dump it in too. Unfortunately, it just never quite settled. So when it came time to actually move the fish, I couldn't see through the tank. So what I decided to do was to pump the water out of this tank and then pump the water from the tank they were coming from into the new tank. And it was a little better, but not quite. You'll see at the end of this video that even after a few days, it was still slightly cloudy. I brought over 2 large rocks, including one that had a very large, well-established Anubias. For my light for this tank, I will be using whatever the heck this is. And I say that because I bought this off of Amazon a long time ago. It's kind of cheap. But what's great about it being cheap is that it's not very strong and it doesn't grow algae. I have a glass lid for this tank. This is the only glass lid that I own, and something that I've noticed is that it blocks a lot of light, and between this and the weak light, it doesn't tend to have a lot of algae. I know that lights tend to make fish prettier, but these aren't that pretty of fish to begin with, so honestly, I don't really care if the light is that bright. So in this case, between the weak light, the glass, and the duckweed, I almost never have any algae in this tank. I pulled out as many shells from the old tank as I could and brought them over to the new tank. I couldn't believe the more I dug how many shells that I found in there. If you need to get a shell to sink, it's as simple as spinning it in the water and letting it fill up and then sink down. I then started pumping the water out of the old tank into the new tank, and I had tons of duckweed to remove before I could even see the fish that I was trying to catch. With the water level low, it was pretty simple to catch the fish. I got many of them at one time in each scoop and brought them over to the tank. Considering I only started with 9 of these fish a few years ago, I couldn't believe how many were in there. I probably moved like 100 of them. One of the things that I usually do when I'm only catching a few fish is keep a container of water close by and catch them one at a time and keep them in there so that I can transfer them all at once. Surprisingly, this water is actually less cloudy than it was, if you believe it. And one day later, unfortunately, it is still almost too cloudy to see the fish. You can see them swimming around in there, but it is just impossible to see in the tank, so I think it's going to take a while for this to clear up. About 3 days later, though, the water was pretty clear. Everything had a thin layer of dust on it, but you could definitely see the fish swimming around in there and getting to know their shells and doing what they do and kind of chasing each other around, showing off to each other, and just their fascinating behaviors. All of them trying to find their own real estate in their own shell. Well, obviously that did not go perfect, but it's fine. They're in their new home. Everything looks great, and with time, the water's going to clear up just with water changes. So I hope you learned a little something. Thanks for coming and watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Wishlist out.